Hey, you just completed your online survey, exported your data to SPSS or some other software, and you were expecting a neat spreadsheet where every column is a question and each row has the participant's answers so you can jump straight into your analysis. Instead, you got multiple columns with ones and zeros like this. In this short video, I explain what happened and how you can use SPSS to turn this data format into this data format if that's what you want to do. The reason your data looks like this has nothing to do with SPSS or your stats software, but is the result of how you set up your questions in your online survey. The difference between this and this data is that multiple choice questions in online surveys can either be single answer questions or multiple answer questions. I'm showing online surveys here, but this also applies to other services like Qualtrics. This happy with your purchase question is a typical single answer question. Our survey participants should only select one of the multiple choices. You might also have a question that is a true multi-answer question, where you, for instance, want your participants to select all answers that apply. As an example, you might ask them about all the animals they consider to be good pets. Any single answer question will look like this when your participants' responses are exported to SPSS. There's one column that includes the response of each participant as the values you assign to the different response options. Any multi-answer question will look like this when exported to SPSS. There's one column for each response option. For example, for our pet question, we get 4 columns. One for the response cat, one for dog, one for bird, one for rat. The ones and zeros in each column show which answers every participant selected. 1 means that they selected that answer, 0 means that they didn't. For example, this participant selected that and rats make good pets, but did not select birds. We need several columns for such multi-answer questions because all statistics software have the rule that every cell can only ever contain one data entry. We could write dog, rat into a single cell, but we could not run any analyses with that data. If your question was a true multi-answer question, it might take a while for you to get used to how this data is displayed here with zeros and ones in multiple columns, but this is in fact the perfect format for you to analyze your data. You can, for example, run descriptives on each column or compare the columns to each other in cross tables. But you might have mistakenly set up a multi-answer question in your survey even though your actual question is a single answer question. You can see here how that happens very easily and how the two formats look super similar so that you might not notice the mistake until you export your survey responses to SPSS. As you can see here, this mix-up in the question format is the reason why responses on your question look like this instead of this. Just as in the pet example, you now have separate columns for each response option and have ones and zeros to indicate which options your participants chose. Lucky for you, most of your survey participants will still have only selected a single answer, although this wasn't required by the question format. Because of that, we can actually use SPSS to turn this data format into this data format. That will be necessary if you want to do analyses like combine answers on multiple questions for a Likert scale or analyze mean, standard deviations, and other descriptives for your question. If this is the case for you, stay tuned for the second half of this video, where I show you how to change your data format with a clever trick. We eventually want a column where participants' responses are coded as different numbers, like this. So, as a first step, we need to decide which numbers we would like to assign to each response. For my question, I want to assign numbers 1 through 4, but you can use whatever numbers make sense for your data. One way of getting this single column data format would obviously be to go through our data set and do it by hand. Let's look at this first participant. We can see that they selected strongly agree. Therefore, we would want their value on our new variable to be a 4. This next participant selected disagree, and we would assign them a 2, and so on. Here with our last participant, we can see that they selected both agree and strongly agree. That was probably a mistake, and we would most likely want to leave their response in the new variable blank, since we cannot be sure what their intended response was. For your own data, feel free to give it a go and assign the new variable by hand for a few participants. That will really help you understand your data better. But of course, we don't want to do that for a full data set. Firstly, you might have hundreds of participants and it would take a long time. And secondly, it's very easy to make mistakes if you skip between data rows. So let's have a look at how SPSS can do this task for you. We will use the SPSS function to compute a new variable. You can find that in the transform menu. You might have used this before to, for example, add up multiple variables and make a total score. This function allows you to define the values of a new variable, which we name in this field here, as the result of a formula that we specify here. For example, to make a variable that tells us how many of the animals our participants consider as suitable pets, we can add up the variables corresponding to each option. Since any selected animal adds a 1 to the sum and any non-selected animal adds a 0, the total sum will be the number of selected animals for each participant. As a quick note, make sure that zeros are not specified as missing values in your variables when doing such calculations to compute new variables. That will cause SPSS to not perform the calculation. It's easy to change though, as you can see right here. Now it's time to think about if we can come up with a formula that combines our many purchase variables into a single purchase variable that takes on the same values that we would assign by hand. Pause the video here to try and figure it out. One tip, you will make a sum, but you will need to use the values we assign to our different responses as multipliers. Did you figure it out? It looks like this. Let me walk you through the formula quickly. We actually want to multiply each column with the value we assigned to those respective responses earlier, and then sum those multiplied values up across all columns. Remember, those are the values we want for our combined column. Let me show you how this formula will produce those values if we use it in SPSS to compute the new purchase variable. Just like we already know, SPSS goes row by row to plug values into our formula. For this first participant in our first row, that will look like this. SPSS calculates 0 times 1, which is 0, plus 0 times 2, which is still 0, plus 0 times 3, still 0, plus 1 times 4, which is 4. That result will show up as this participant's value in the response variable. They selected strongly agree on our purchase question, which we wanted to be coded as the value 4, and that's what our formula assigned. Yay! Here's what it looks like as SPSS goes through to do this for every participant. This one answered disagree and gets the value 2. This one answered agree and gets the value 3. This one answered strongly disagree and gets the value 1. All good. Let's see what happens for a participant who mistakenly selected multiple answers. Oh, it doesn't work. We need to tell SPSS to not compute anything if there are multiple ones across our response columns. Let's do that. We're back in SPSS and go to Transform Compute Variable where we enter our formula. To tell SPSS not to compute anything if a participant selected multiple answers, we go to the If menu and say that we only want to include cases in this computation if the sum across all responses equals 1. We then either press OK to compute right away or paste to our syntax. Ta-da! SPSS automatically created the variable we were looking for to analyze data for a single answer question. We can now assign our labels from strongly disagree to strongly agree and use this variable for any of our next analyses. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, check out the resources link below or contact us at the Math Support Center.